and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture, and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. Hello, I'm back from my holiday and have recovered from the socialness of it. My cousin had a lovely wedding and I had a great time relaxing, and I only got sunburnt once, you'll be happy to hear. Turns out though that Turkey has some of the most violent mosquitoes I've ever met, and I was bitten rather than burnt, which some would say is worse in the short term. I also apologise for the lateness of this episode. Life sometimes does just get in the way, but hey, I've got it out to you eventually. Anyway, we are heading somewhere equally warm to Turkey this week, and heading over to Thailand for the first time ever. And I do have a slight change of plan with this episode. Mostly because I'm late, I wanted to combine it with another Thai monster, as they also often work together and it helps fill out the episode to a much greater extent than just the one. So I hope you're ready for this ghostly pair, the Krahang and the Krasue. Apologies for the late add-on, but I found during my research as well that the Krahang itself is more of an add-on monster to the Krasue, so it would make sense to do them together. But I appreciate it's very last minute, and I hope it comes across as more of a nice surprise to get two in one episode instead of a marginal error on my end when researching. We will start with the Krahang though. They are described as a male ghost who has glowing eyes, is completely shirtless, and only wearing a loincloth. He brandishes a rice winnowing basket to use to fly, which he kind of wears like braces or like swim bands, and wields a long rice pounding pestle, which he is sometimes seen riding like a broomstick. During the day, he lives the life of a normal villager and only really starts his hauntings in the night of rural areas. It's said that the Krahang came to be because the man who is the Krahang would have started to use sorcery, and it backfired on him, turning him into a permanent fixture of the ghostly companions we know. In contrast, the Krasue is his companion ghost, who is always female and is described as a beautiful woman with a very tired expression during the day. But at night, her head detaches and pulls out her spinal cord and entrails from the rest of her body and floats about with the Krahang. Her ghostly form has just her head, sometimes with rows of sharpened teeth in a wide grin, her lungs, heart, stomach and intestines hanging down from her floating neck, dripping with blood and slightly glowing. They are both totally vampiric in nature and live off of the blood of victims that are already dead or incapacitated. They are not physically capable of killing anything, and so they would survive off of sleeping people, as well as livestock like cattle and chickens if they couldn't get people. Pregnant women are the Krasue's favourite snack, and she would love to get her teeth in a placenta, meaning locals would naturally bury them as deep as possible to keep them away. If the pair can help it, they would feed on blood, but if that wasn't available, they would eat rotting food, carrion, and animal and human waste. The Krasue comes to be in a couple of different ways. Usually it's from being cursed by engaging in too many sins in a previous life, and once the woman dies, she becomes this ghost, or put in Thai. She is then doomed to live on the waste of humanity and feeds off of that. However, she could also have been possessed by an evil spirit of a Krasue, tried learning black magic and made a mistake, had an abortion or killed someone in a previous life, or even just consumed the food or drink that had Krasue saliva in. However, It is usually the curse or the black magic practice that gets you turning into one, or even sometimes you could just be related to someone who is, and that could pass on. The Krasue is under a curse in Thai culture, and it's driven to consume constantly. They would hide their headless body in a quiet, secret place and take off for the night with the Krahang. They would hunt through rural, dark places in Thailand to find their prey, and would both eat the waste left from humans. But if they found a living one, of course, they would work as a team to get them in their clutches. First, the Krahang would scare them off the path into the wilderness, leaving them open to the Krasue, who would wait for them to fall asleep and pass out and feed on their blood. They are, though, incredibly embarrassed of their curse, even in their ghostly forms, meaning that if you catch them around, they would both end up trying to get away from you as quickly as possible. The Krahang doesn't really have much information on how to prevent them or destroy them, although they do seem a lot less dangerous than their wives. For Krasue, there is at least a method of prevention, which is building spiky fences or planting sharp bamboo outside your house. As they're frightened, their intestines may get stuck to them in flight. You could tell that a Krasue had been nearby, as if you had any washing hanging out that you were drying outside, it would be covered in human waste and blood where she has wiped her mouth. Gross. You could also kill a Krasue, and there are a few ways to do this, but you'd have to find her body for a few. Once you found the body, you could either crush, burn, or steal it, as if the top half cannot find the bottom half by sunlight, it would burn up like a vampire in the morning. If you found her in the wild with her body detached, you could cut off her intestines to cause her to burst into a beam of light and die too. They are generally not a solo creature in terms of they were able to create more of themselves by feeding on unsuspecting sleeping people, because if you were bitten, it was destined that you would become one once you died, so it is that full circle of reproduction really. But now, let's move on to etymology, and we have a bit of a sad one for this one, and that's that we don't have anything on record. We have assumptions, which is that Krasue might link to the word curse, and that Krahang comes from the word for those rice winnowing baskets he uses, Krahang, but we're really not massively sure. In regards to their history, it's also a little bit shaky, due to the tribal nature and mostly word of mouth myth spreading in these areas. However, we do have a time bracket of when they were first written about. In 1805, there was a text published of all known Thai ghosts, called the Three Seals Law. Within this, neither the Krasue or the Krahang were mentioned, meaning that it was later on that they were written into belief. But we do believe that they are much older than this, just to clarify. They just weren't written down about at this point. And to a definitive date, we don't have the answer, I'm afraid. But I do have a really good fictional story to the Krasue's origin, which I thought I would share. There was once a princess who was in love with a man from a lower status, but she had been prearranged to marry a Siamese nobleman. They loved each other and apparently had a few flings, but eventually the fiancé found out about this and sent her to be executed by burning at the stake. The night before the execution, the princess found a powerful witch who placed a spell over her to protect herself from the flames. However, the spell only took effect over half of her body, and only her head, neck, and her internal organs remained intact, whilst the flames consumed the rest of her, leaving her as the first ever Krasue. However, the Krasue and the Krahang pair are renowned throughout Thai culture, and are some of the most famous mythical monsters from this part of the world. So much so but they are still seen and mentioned to this day in Thailand. So let's get into some recent sightings, shall we? In July 2017, an 18-year-old girl in Buriram province said she saw a Krahang through a gap near the ceiling of her bathroom. It appeared as a large man with a winged back, and she panicked and fled, telling her whole village about the incident. Many of the older villagers also panicked, and one said that she had seen that same Krahang for about 10 years. The woman reportedly tried to get her son to film the creature, but never managed to do so. The elder of the village blamed a previously occupied house where her mother and sister died, and she reported seeing bright lights floating outside at night and believed they were a Krasue and Krahang. Eventually, the village hired a sorcerer and still did not manage to banish either of them. Later that year, a video clip was shared online showing an alleged floating thing in the air at the same level as a tree in the area at night. There is no information as to where this video came from, and it did cause a stir online. However, it was found out that the entity was actually a drone decorated as a man's face as a hoax, so I guess that one's easy. Last year in May, some teenagers in Ratchaburi province were chatting around midnight at the edge of an irrigation canal. Suddenly, the youngest one noticed a strange red light floating in the direction of them. The other one shouted, "Krasue!" and they all hurried away on a motorbike. It was recorded by one of them and posted on TikTok, where it went massively viral, and an elderly local man said the area used to be rampant with Krasue in the past. This Krasue is named Ikuem and is believed to float across the river from the opposite side. In October 2023, there were 3 eyewitness reports of Krasue in the Lopburi province. One was an elderly farmer who said he had a serious confrontation with a Krasue. It appeared to be a woman in her 60s with shoulder-length white hair, and she even bared her teeth at him. As he was about to hit her with a shovel he was carrying, it floated away, and he claims that Krasue tried to break into his duck and chicken coops, and later experimented with a dead duck, and found the next day a Krasue had eaten all of the intestines out of the corpse. One of the female eyewitnesses in this case said she encountered the Krasue in a field while waiting for her husband to farm. She said it floated along the surface of the water in the rice fields, along with its intestines. She tried to take a video clip with her phone, but was only able to capture 2 very blurry photos. The last eyewitness account in this case was a 21-year-old woman who had just given birth a few days before. She woke up at 2 a.m. because the baby was crying, and when she finished taking care of it, she went to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw a strange light in front of the house, and when she opened the curtains to see, it looked like something was floating past. She also said she had left a large amount of blood-stained sanitary pads in the bin in the front of the house, which were all torn up the next day. Lastly, this year, in January 2024, a 16-year-old girl in Surin province went to take pictures of a starry night and found that in one of the images, something that looked like a Krasue appeared floating above the tree. Later, a local on Facebook posted this photo along with a message warning them to beware of its rampage, and many locals confirmed that they had seen Krasue in that area before. So they are still definitely about by all accounts, but they're also used throughout Thai culture as a cultural icon. It's said that an abnormally small banana should be eaten by the Krasue, and that someone who eats food too fast eats like a Krasue. There's also a type of luminescent Thai mushroom named after them, the Krasue mushroom. And lastly, there's a village called Krasue Marsh, but it was renamed because it was too frightening to residents, and it was set to Happiness Marsh instead. Boo to that is all I can say. We do also, on the other hand, have possible scientific explanations to them, and that is swamp science, my friends. When methane, which is natural within a swamp environment, builds up within rotting food, bodies, or any other organic matter, it eventually explodes, which may create a little firework in the middle of a big field, for example. And considering they tend to like these rural areas, it makes sense. However, there is an argument as to what causes ignition in these cases, but we won't think about that bit. Lastly, our mythical comparisons for this one are really easy. They are unbelievably common types of monsters in Southeast Asian folklore, with the Manananggal in the Philippines, the Penanggalang in Malaysia, and the Liak in Indonesia. All of these being detachable head vampire ladies. And I've covered all of these so far. If you want to go back through the Myth Monsters catalogue and listen to the distinct episodes on them, they are inherently really interesting, and each one of these cultures talks about them and has them representing a part of their culture individually to this day. The Krahang actually reminds me slightly of Baba Yaga from Slavic folklore because of his pestle and improvised wings, as she flies around on a pestle as a broomstick too, and that is definitely not a comparison I was expecting to make with this monster. But now let's jump onto modern media. There's a couple of bits for this one that are in Thai and other Southeast Asian media for both of these monsters. For art though, I would recommend looking at independent for this one. Unfortunately, there aren't many portrait or scroll arts for these two, so have a look at the creations of artists recently for much spookier views on them, I promise you. In movies, we have Inhumane Kiss, The Last Breath, My Mother is an Arb, Krasue Sao, Knack, Oil of Eternal Life, Bloodthirsty Krasue, Demonic Beauty, Krasue Valentine, The Gluttonous Sphere, Krasue Fat Pop, Krasue Rak Krasue Sawat, Fita 1 Kap Achan Tabo, Lady Vampire, Hereditary of Krasue, Freedom Deal, Mystics in Bali, Witch with the Flying Head, Krahang and Krasue. For TV, we have Krasue Mahanakon, Krasue, Creepshow, Thepsam Rudo, Grim, Fresh Meat, Encrypted, The Aswang Phenomenon, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Marvel Anime Blade, Tresse, Supernatural and Elemento. In video games, we have ones such as Eyes, the horror game, Nightfall Escape, Shin Megami Tensei, Manang Game, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Indivisible, Dark Conspiracy, Malifaux, and Final Fantasy. My book recommendation this week is for In Grandmother's House, Thai Folklore, Traditions and Rural Village Life by Sora Singh Kawai and Peter Robinson for a great look into local folklore in Thailand. And if you've got little ones, grab a copy of Thai children's favourite stories, Fables, Myths and Legends by Marian de Toth and Pachari Misukon for some really sweet and illustrated Thai myths that are suitable for children, not including the Krasue. But now it is time for Do I Think They Existed? I'm always a bit on the fence about ghostly ones because there are just so many of them throughout world mythology that it's really hard to deny their existence sometimes. However, with these two, it's a little bit more out there than the usual hauntings, so maybe I would consider them a bit more dubious than others. I do think that the Southeast Asian female vampire organ floating monsters are a bit of a push here in terms of believability. I think you could probably get away with the Krahang on his own, because he just kind of seems like every drunk Brit that you would meet out in Thailand, who came out for the cheap booze and discovered that they have giant pestles and decided to ride it like a broom. It's very typical British lad culture. However, with the Krasue, Manananggal, Penanggalang and Liak, they're a little bit harder to justify in a normal environment due to what they look like, what they are, especially nowadays. I think we would know if a floating head with organs was drifting around. But people are still reporting seeing them, so who am I to deny it, I suppose? I do love that these two are considered a married couple and that they kind of spend their evenings doing romantic things, such as eating blood and terrorising villages with a large stick and rice baskets. #couple goals. But it also makes it trickier to say yes to, because there have been so few Krahang sightings in comparison to Krasue, and obviously they're meant to be around together. I do adore covering Asian ghosts, aswang and yokai, so these two have been quite high up on my list for a little while, and I hope we can cover some more, albeit some of them do end up crossing over into the similar monster episodes, but I quite like the continuity somewhat. But what do you think? Did the Krahang and Krasue haunt the dark recesses of Thailand? Let me know on Twitter, I would love to know what you think about this one. And what a combo monster this week. We've not really done any of these for a little while, and especially not ones that are considered married. So I hope the last minute add-on and the delay with the Krasue was worth it, and a nice surprise. She definitely helped me fill out the episode, which you might have noticed there's not much on the Krahang, which massively saved me too. So I do appreciate that from her. Next week, we're not heading anywhere in particular, but we are looking at a religious monster, which I think 99.9% of people know worldwide. So I hope you've been good, because we're loving angels instead next Thursday. And I hope you all know that Robbie Williams song, because it will be cameoed consistently throughout the episode. But now though, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got the Twitter for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube, Threads and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, including some very cool merchandise. And you can also find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals. They might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later, babes.